Welcome to Shelf Talkers, a podcast from Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Okay, welcome to Shelf Talkers, everyone. This is Jennifer Casper. I'm the founder and owner of Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. And Shelf Talkers is our podcast where we talk to authors about books. And this episode, we are so lucky to have with us Jesmyn de León. He is the winner of the National Book Award for his book, Soldiers and Kings, which is, he won for the nonfiction category. And we're here to talk to him about it today. Jesmyn is an anthropologist and a professor at UCLA, and he's known for documenting the lives of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. We're so lucky to be down the street from the great university, UCLA. We get some of the coolest, most interesting authors publishing books from their academic seats that are culturally relevant and commercially attractive. And they help us carry out our mission to be a place for conversation about important topics that are hard to talk about and that we need to talk about more. So, Jesmyn, welcome. And will you kick us off by giving us a shelf talker for Soldiers and Kings?
Yeah, that's difficult these days. I feel like the book, to me, is a different. It's sort of like what I think about the book personally versus I think how people have read it. I guess if I had to give a shelf talk for the general public, it's a deep dive and immersive look at the everyday lives of smugglers who are moving migrants across the length of Mexico, where I try to help people understand what the day-to-day looks like, how people end up in smuggling, how they try to get away from smuggling, and the important labor that it provides for migrants globally.
Yeah, it's that's a good summary, and I could see I'm looking forward to our conversation and getting to it from different angles because there's just so much there and so many reasons why people should read it. But before we dig into the book, can we talk about your work more generally and how you got to this project? You have a background in archaeology and anthropology. You teach college students. You have a project called the Undocumented Migrant Project. Can you talk about sort of that as the context for how you came to choose to work on this book? And
yeah, I'm a bit all over the place, I think, for a lot of folks. I come to this in a bit of a roundabout way. For almost 10 years, I was a kind of dyed-in-the-wool archaeologist. My doctoral thesis was on ancient stone tools. It was during the course of that work in Mexico that I got to know a lot of local people in these rural communities who were working on these archaeological projects as laborers. And it was through them that I started to hear more and more about the experiences people were having crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. And it was by the time I finished my dissertation, I realized that I was much less interested in what was coming out of the ground and way more interested in the stories that people were telling me. So I decided to shift gears to kind of think about what border crossings look like, up close. And it was during the course of the early stages of that project, really trying to develop it, that I realized that migrants leave a lot of stuff behind while migrating. And that's when I decided to try to use my skill set in archaeology to tell that part of the story. Like what could be gleaned from this difficult experience by looking at the things that people bring with them and that they leave behind. And then from that project, I began to get interested in the forensics of how bodies decompose in the desert and disappear. I started working with families of missing migrants, trying to understand how people sit with this kind of unending grief that comes with searching for a lost loved one and essentially perpetuity. And so my first book, The Land of Open Graves, was really about the what happens to people in the Sonoran Desert. When that project was done, I really wanted to shift gears and think about a different element of the story. And that really, for me, was smuggling, and the fact that so many people talk about migration, and smugglers are always in the room if you're talking about migration, and yet there had been very little work done to understand what that labor looks like, who those individuals are. And so I really wanted to pick up a project that was going to force me to think about the migration story in a different kind of way. And also one that would force me to, I think, kind of examine my own stereotypes or my own kind of simplistic understanding of what it means to be a smuggler or be smuggled. And that's what Soldiers and Kings kind of came out of. It was about 7 years of working on the migrant trail in Mexico, the Mexico-Guatemala border. I worked quite a bit in Honduras, and then from basically Chiapas all the way up to the Sonoran Desert of Arizona.
And at some point in there, you won a MacArthur Genius Award. When was that, and did that impact the creation of this book?
So that happened in 2017. I was already working on this project at that. I was already 2 years into this project at that point.
So you started this in 2015?
Yeah.
And the book's
Yeah.
just coming out 9 years later after you started.
Yeah, a little slow.
Long project.
And
Yeah.
people ask like, "Oh, when is the next book coming out?" I said, "Well, I need 5 years to do the work and probably another 3 years to write it." COVID was in the middle of that. But yeah, it was a pretty long process, and kind of on purpose. I think it was such a difficult ethical book to write. It was a very complicated kind of story, and so I needed time to reflect on things and try to be as thoughtful as possible. And so for me, trying to slow down was really important. And in many ways, the MacArthur Fellowship allowed me to do that. I mean, it basically gave me this new level of visibility where I was suddenly I could kind of write my own ticket at that point. It felt like it allowed me to move institutions. So I was at University of Michigan for almost a decade, and with the fellowship, then suddenly it became a lot easier to find a new place to work. And I really wanted to be back in LA, and so that helped. And I think the other thing that the MacArthur Fellowship really did for me was, at that point, people said you can write whatever kind of book you want to write. And I knew that I did not want to write another academic book. And my first book is kind of a crossover. It's sort of half academic, half trade. And that wasn't really by design. That was just kind of the way it came out. And with this book, I really wanted to write for a general audience, and I wanted to really emphasize story much more than anthropological theory or anything else. And I really wanted to kind of find my voice as a writer. And so I think in many ways that's kind of what this fellowship allowed me to do.
That's so great. And that's, one of the reasons why I love being down the street from UCLA and being able to get authors like you in here, because you are telling stories that are, you've got the deep academic research that go into them. You're telling important work and you're doing it well. But you're telling it in a way that's also commercially accessible and interesting. And I love being able to pass that on to customers. So talk a little bit more about anthropology. I have a friend who got a doctorate in anthropology when we were in our 20s, and I said, "What are you going to do with that?" He said he didn't want to be a teacher, and he's gone on to have the most interesting career working for big corporations and helping them to understand people and put it into technology. But I mean, you're obviously on the academic side of it. But can you talk a little bit about what ethnography is? Is ethnography the same thing as cultural anthropology? Are those interchangeable terms?
Yes and no. I think, we could think about cultural anthropology as being interested in modern people globally. Ethnography is sort of the way in which you look at those people's lives. So ethnography is like an important tool of, if not the most important tool of being a cultural anthropologist. Although, sociologists do it now, and they would argue that they invented it, and that's debatable. But you see people using ethnographic research methods in a wide range of disciplines. I think people will also talk about ethnography as participant observation, and so you're studying contemporary people by observing and by participating kind of in their lives. And then ethnography is sort of taking all that information and then trying to tell a story about that. So you're retelling the data in a way that is sort of narrative driven or immersive, or trying to get people close to the details of what it actually looked like when you were doing it.
So there are different steps in the process.
Yeah.
In the bigger process. So tell me, what are the stories that we want people to hear?
I think number one, nobody wakes up one day and goes, I want to be a smuggler.
Yeah.
People fall into it in a bunch of different ways, usually united around, childhoods characterized by violence, characterized by intense poverty. Um, Many of the, or all of the smugglers I worked with were failed migrants. And so they had tried to go to the United States. They didn't really have a social network to kind of receive them on the other end. They didn't always have the best kind of social skills that would allow them to kind of integrate into society in any kind of normal way. And so these are a lot of, kids raised on the streets who are very street smart, but
Hmm.
don't necessarily have other social skills that allow them to kind of, lead a kind of normal life. And so, something like smuggling is really has a gravitational pull because they have all the skill sets that one would need. They're very smart. They're street smart. They can be violent when necessary. They kind of understand the complexities of the migration trail because they've sort of lived it and they've come of age on it. And so, in the book, you really get to see or hear about what those people's lives are like, and oftentimes from their own voices, people telling their stories to me about how they ended up where they are. I think the things that I really learned. I mean, I knew I was going to go into it, and that I was going to be moved by these people, that I was going to be changed in some way, because I always expect that with ethnography. I think everybody has an interesting story. Everybody has something to say that's important. It's just a matter of, are we asking the right questions and are we really listening? So I went into that expecting that, and of course, I think that's what I got. But other things that I kind of learned along the way that were surprising was number one, you don't make a lot of money smuggling. It seems like you do, but it's really this boom or bust kind of moment where there's the times where you get paid and it's thousands of dollars,
Mm.
and then there's other times where you're sleeping on the train tracks and you're barely putting food in your stomach. Um, it kind of reminded me of my colleague and friend Philippe Bourgois, who's also at UCLA, who wrote a book in the 90s called In Search of Respect that was all about crack dealing in Harlem. And one of the things that he found was that these guys were making lots of money in small bursts, but when you averaged it all out, they were making less than minimum wage. And so this idea that the drug dealer makes all this money or that the smuggler makes all this money is actually, is deceptive, because there are times where they have lots of money, but as you people can read in the book, then there are other times where these folks go from, multiple apartments to sleeping on the ground.
Yeah.
And so that was surprising to me. And just the fact that smuggling is, I'd characterize it as like it's semi-organized. And so
Huh.
it's organized enough that the system keeps kind of moving, and smugglers provide a labor for migrants that's desperately needed. But at the same time, um, you know, someone can be killed, can be arrested, and this thing will kind of collapse and then immediately rebuild itself. And so there's not, you can't, I think you can't, for that reason, you can't ever stop it, because there's no one head of it. And it's not,
Mm.
the hierarchy isn't very clear. What is clear, though, is that this thing needs to perpetuate itself, and it will do so kind of seemingly by any means necessary.
Because the
Which was
demand
kind
is
of, I
there.
expected more structure, because when I heard the border patrol talk about smuggling, that's always like these organized, crime rings.
Hmm.
Yeah, and they really sort of describe it in a way that seems much more organized than it actually is. Smuggling has in I mean, I think it's always been a dangerous occupation, because you're dealing with an illicit economy. Everybody is highly vulnerable in different moments. There's lots of people who are trying to exploit migrants in different ways, and also to make money off of the movement of people. Um, I think what you have seen over the last 15 years is that organized crime, like drug cartels, especially in a place like Mexico, have become increasingly interested in finding ways to tax the migrant trail. And, whether it's through a head tax or through kidnapping and extortion, which has just really made the whole process very, very dangerous. And, in the course of the book, I kind of, you sort of see how it starts out really dangerous. And by the end, the guys that I had been writing about were completely, um, um, convinced that they had to get out or they were going to lose their lives, kind of thing. And and
Hmm.
and we sort of saw that unravel in real time as I was doing the work, to the point now that you can't get across Mexico without a smuggler, because it's so dangerous. And now you really need a breed of smuggler who is willing to do kind of whatever is necessary to protect those clients.
It hasn't always been, it's gotten more dangerous over time, you're saying. Like a
Yes,
generation
definitely.
ago, it was an easier thing to do.
100%.
Yeah.
I think smuggling has gotten more dangerous for two reasons, both because, um, Mexican drug cartels and transnational gangs have seen it as an easy moneymaker. I mean, all you have to do is kind of stay in your territory, and migrants are coming through on a daily basis. And so now you're just figuring out how do I control their movement and tax that movement. And it's through that control that I think that that's really ramped up a lot of the
Hmm.
violence.
Okay.
But the fact that you also have the Mexican government with the help of the U.S. who is trying to make this process more dangerous or slow it down, that's also made it more expensive. And in combination, there's a rise in corruption with government officials. Everybody's looking at these migrants coming through and seeing dollar signs, and I think because of that, it's just made the experience so much more dangerous, in a variety of different ways.
And how do the migrants find the smugglers?
You really want someone who has some kind of community connection or familial connection, because if something goes wrong, then your family knows who to go after to figure out where you're
Hmm.
at. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that luxury. They leave their home country in the middle of the night, or they're coming from a place like Venezuela now or Haiti, and they have a different smuggler in every country that they have to
Hmm.
cross. And so they might just land in Mexico, and then now suddenly they're asking around like, does someone know a good smuggler? And it's really hit or miss that you could connect with someone who's gonna kind of follow through with what they say they're gonna do, or it could be someone who just will immediately rob you and or do something much worse.
And then how do they get paid? Do they generally take all the money up front?
Everything moves largely through like Western Union and through these
Hmm.
electronic transfer kind of things. And I mean, Western Union makes millions of dollars a day off of transferred smuggling fees. Um, but with the way that this works, in an ideal world, you contract someone from your home community, you pay half up front, and then you pay the other half once you get to where you're going. What may happen though is like you pay half up front and then you go, and then every week or however long the journey is, this person nickels and dimes you and says, "Oh, by the way, this is going to cost you extra for this," or "We never promised this," or "You got to just pay for this," kind of thing now. Um, but that's expensive for a lot of folks. And right now, to get across Mexico can be, $15,000, $20,000 for the whole
Wow.
trip. Most people don't have anything close to that amount of money. And so they might leave Honduras with $1,000, and you give 500 to a smuggler to get you as far as you can get with that, and then you
Hmm.
wait for family to wire more money. You take a job under the table. You figure out some way to get some extra income, and then continue on. But that's what sort of prolongs the journey a lot of times is people don't have enough money for the whole thing, so they have to pay for it piecemeal.
Right, right. I was really touched by your descriptions in the book about how you personally carried out the work and the impact it had on your life. It took time away from you with your wife and kids, and you were emotionally impacted by getting close to people who had horrible, violent things happen to them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, this book really taught me a lot about empathy. It taught me a lot about, I think, hope. These folks are
Mm.
so hopeful and just trying to do the best they can in these very difficult circumstances. And it really impacted me. I mean, just it made me kind of, I mean, in the beginning, I think the first thing that happened was, I spent all this time with these young men who are living this brutal existence, who are kind of living on the edge of so many different dangerous and difficult things. And at one point I had to look around and ask myself, like, why am I here? Like, what is it
Hmm.
about this situation that has brought me here? And why do I seem to be kind of, I don't want to say thriving in it, but why do I feel
Oh,
so comfortable in this whole thing? And so, I think part of what I talk about in the beginning of the book is that the path that these guys were on, or the kind of experiences that they had of like childhood abuse and, the sort of difficult circumstances, some of it felt very, very familiar to me. And it wasn't until I started writing about it that I realized that that I had been drawn to this stuff because it felt familiar on some level. And I think in some ways that really helped me to empathize with them in a different kind of way that I would have in other circumstances. But for me, ethnography is this deep commitment to people. It's like I'm committed to spending as much time as I can with them. I'm committing myself to listening and to try to tell their story as much as I can.
Mm.
And I think part of that process is I have to give myself to them because they're giving so much to me. And so there was a lot of sharing of like, I see you and you see me, and talking to folks about especially around things like trauma, um, really created this kind of bond for me that was both helpful to do the work, but sometimes also really painful. And when I had
Yeah.
to kind of cut things off, or when things kind of went too far, it wasn't just this intellectual exercise of like, oh, I'm going to go home now. It was, I'm deeply connected to this person emotionally, and I don't know, kind of what to do with it in this difficult situation now.
Yeah. So you're having such a heavy, intense, committed professional experience, and you're still a person dealing with your emotional life, and also you've got this family back home that you're not interacting with. And when you were here, actually the night after the election, you came here and we're speaking about your book, and your daughter was in the store with you, and she was adorably just like off in the kids section, finding books to read and occupying herself like this precocious, beloved daughter that you're raising. And I just had this, I could just feel like, this, what it's like to have a project that's so intense, and
Sure,
balance
sure.
that with also being, a human with a family.
Well, he's a boy. He just has long hair, and
Oh, funny. That was your son.
yeah, but
I'm so
both my
sorry.
no, I don't care. Both my
It
sons have
was
very long hair, and they are always misgender. But I mean, they're so used to it.
that
They don't
that's
care.
so
I mean,
funny. Okay.
but yeah, I mean, I think that they are such an important part of the story for me because, um, I think part of what I do is I'm writing for them,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to um, find hope in the world, even in these really difficult
Yeah.
situations. And it's not just finding hope for myself or because the people I'm writing about have a lot of
Right.
hope in their heart. It's because I need to find it so that I can tell them, hey, even on the train tracks in Pakalna, even in these difficult, brutal situations, people are hopeful about the world and about the future. And so yeah, I take a lot of inspiration from them. Although I don't think I could do this project. When I started the project, the that kid that you met, he was a baby.
Yeah.
Um, my other one wasn't even born yet, and they were pretty small as I was doing this project. And as they got older, and then I got older doing this stuff, it became more and more challenging to be away for as long, but also to kind of expose myself to those things and then come
Mm-hmm.
home and have to deal with it. I don't know if I could do that. I probably couldn't do this project now,
Mm-hmm.
given what I know and given just how much the situations have changed. But those two definitely were always in the back of my mind as I was like doing the work, writing about it, um, and trying to, I was thinking like, if I come out of this, what messages do I want them to take away from
Mm-hmm.
this whole process? What can I tell them that's useful and
Mm-hmm.
not just, the migrant trail is horrible, being a smuggler is a brutal exploitative occupation. I mean, I wanted to give them kind of more than that because I think the world is more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes we just have to find creative ways to remind people that it's a complicated place out there, and it's not so black and white.
Yeah. I just listened to the your acceptance speech when you won the National Book Award, and I wrote down what you said. That's You're paraphrasing here, but you said, "I refuse to live in a world without hope. I will not accept the dystopian American future of unchecked corruption, border walls, misogyny, mass deportations, transphobia, climate change denial, and all the other garbage this incoming administration wants to propagate and profit from." That's so beautifully written, and the passion behind it, I refuse to live in a world without hope, is so moving. And I hear you saying that you were moved by the hope that you witnessed on the migrant trail. And for me, part of what gives me hope is being able to put works like this in the hands of book readers, and getting more people to hear these stories. And winning the National Book Award elevates, the profile of your work again. Hopefully that gets the book out there some more. But tell me, do you have ideas for how we can get more people to read it? You know, a lot of the times, you know, people take in information with a political lens, and they, you know, with both how they take it in is colored by that lens, but also just what they choose to read. You know, how do we get more people to hear the stories that you've gathered and that you can tell that help them understand who immigrants are, what their life is like, what, you know, why this is such a big, complicated issue that we have to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, it's very challenging to tell migration stories, border stories, because there's just so many out there.
Yeah.
I mean, we are flooded with stories about migrants. And I think to the point that people turn it off because they go, I already know the story, so I'm not, why bother? I mean, I know I turn it off a lot of times because I'm like, I already know the story. And I think what we need is we need new kinds of conversations around these things. We need to talk to people in a way that's going to give them more food for thought and not have it feel like they're just being talked at or
Right.
being told kind of how to think about something. And, you know, writing about smugglers, I wanted to tell a different kind of story in hopes that people would pick it up and they would learn, they would, you know, the hook is smuggling, right? You put that in the title
Yeah.
and people go, oh, that sounds salacious, you know, and I want, like,
Right.
I'm really, you know, I'm like, that seems like it's going to be like a true crime kind of story. And, you know, it's like a trick. For me, it's like, actually, this is a story about climate change, about migration, about inequality, about poverty, about race, about misogyny. It's about a million other things, but that gets you in the door. And there was a conversation at one point with Viking about the subtitle of the book and whether Honduras should go in the subtitle. And I said, the only reason to put Honduras in the book title is if you don't want anyone to read it, because people are not going to pick up a book about Honduras unless they are Honduran or unless they are really focused, you know, they have a niche reason to be thinking about that. And so I wanted it to be a more kind of universal story and not one, you know, I don't think about Soldiers and Kings as a story about migration or really as a story about smugglers. I think it's, for me, it's a story about people who happen to be migrating, who happen to be caught up in the world of smuggling, but there's so much more to them than those things. And I think we need more of those types of stories so that people can read it and go and see that it extends far beyond any border,
Yeah.
right? Because we want to narrow these things down and go, okay, smuggling, that's a border problem, right? And I'm like, no, 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 this is like such a much bigger thing, and we have to get people to engage in those stories and with that information in in different kinds of ways. And it reminds me, you know, we have a this global exhibition that we've been doing for several years now called Hostile Terrain 94, and this project is a giant wall map of the Arizona desert populated with about 4,400 toe tags, and they represent people who have died and who are unidentified and people who have been identified. Or they have orange tags and manila tags showing those differences. This exhibition, people come to a gallery or wherever that's being installed, and they sit down and they write out toe tags with information of like cause of death, location of death, name, date, and then they put this onto the map in the exact location of where people were found. The goal, and there's not a lot, I mean, we've done this in about 115, 120 locations around the globe now. And really the idea is to come into a gallery, to come into a space, write out some names of the dead, and then add to this memorial, whatever you want, archive, whatever you want to call it. And then you can decide kind of what to do with that information. But at least for 5, 10, 20 minutes, we have you working on this
Thinking,
thing
right.
in a
Thinking
different kind of
about
way.
a specific person.
And you could do whatever you want with that. But at least now, if someone says to you, oh, a migrant died in Arizona, or they're talking about migration, maybe you have a different frame of reference now to kind of think differently about that. And for me, those are the best kinds of things because I would rather have people have that kind of interactive experience than just come to an exhibition space where I talk at them for an hour and tell them how to
Yeah.
feel. I'm like, I want you to just, you engage with it and then decide based on your own conscience how
Right.
you want to, you know, what you want to take from this.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to get that exhibit or something like it in here in Village Well
Yeah,
if a
I mean,
if it could be put up in a smaller space.
we have we're building a smaller kind of classroom friendly version that I hope we have in
Hmm.
the, I mean, it's quite a bit of labor to do the big one. I mean, it takes like six
Yeah.
weeks and you need, but there's, there's several up right now. Actually, there's one, Point Loma Nazarene University has one
Uh-huh.
up. The Museum of Us in San Diego has one up. There's a couple in New York right now. Um, so they're, they're around, but we're
Yeah.
working on several different versions, and yeah, so people can
That's
do
great.
it in a
Yeah.
more, kind of easier, more manageable
Right. You're reaching
activity.
a lot of people. Do you have another book project in the works that you can talk about? Do you know what you're going to do next?
I wish.
Yeah.
I think that I'll start doing some field work, probably locally now. I mean, I think I'm not sure what the next project is, other than it will be in the United States, and it will be on the kind of, the day-to-day experiences of undocumented folks now.
Hmm.
Um, and which is also really challenging. I mean, do we need another book about what it means to be undocumented in the United States, or what undocumented labor kind of looks like? I think we do, but the challenge is to then tell it in a radically different kind of way. I don't know what that is yet, but I know that 'cause I think about all the books as part of this trajectory. And so the first one is about,
Hmm.
migrants who are coming. The second one is about the people who work to get them here, and then I think the third one will really be about, what does the American dream look like,
Hmm.
and how are people kind of experiencing the day-to-dayness of being undocumented, and beyond that. I mean, I also really want to. It's the same thing with, like, it won't be a book about being undocumented. It'll be about people who just happen to be undocumented who are doing other interesting sorts of things.
Hmm.
But yeah, I definitely think I need to do something domestic, and probably partly based in Los Angeles, so that I can do it, you know, with my kids getting older. It's harder to kind of do the kind of field work that I did previously. So it'd be nice to drive someplace and do some work.
Yeah. Do you have an ideal reader in mind when you're writing?
Um,
Not
I get,
not ideal,
y-
but typical,
it's funny. I used to get this question a lot, especially when I was like transitioning from an academic audience to whatever, to like my first book is sort of a crossover, and then the second one it's a trade book. And people would ask me early on, it's, who is your audience?
Yeah.
And um, I'm increasingly saying, like, not anthropologists,
Yeah.
because I don't care if anthropologists read my work anymore. I mean, they can get this from other places. I think I really want anyone who's interested in story to get something out of this. And if I
Hmm.
can, if I can also teach them a little bit about anthropology, about politics, about other stuff, that's great. But it's just trying to get these stories out there so that people can engage with them, and take something from them. Because
Hmm.
for me, I think the whole process of doing anthropology or writing about other people's experiences, it's really extractive. I mean, it's like in anthropology where it's like these colonialist kind of roots where we go and take what we want and we report to other people, and we just forget about whose stories the people we're actually writing about. And for me, I think the goal is, it's hard to give back to those communities. I mean, you can do it in different ways, but it's a challenge. And maybe the one thing I can really guarantee that I'm going to try my best to do is to take their stories and to put them out into the world, so that other people can hear them as well, and to really, because I want people to care about the people that I care about, that I write about. I want them to care as much as I do. And
Of
so I sort
course.
of think, like, that's my audience, is like, I want you to meet Chino,
Right.
Kingston, Jesmyn. I want you to know who they are, because they're important to me, and I think that they should be important to the world. But yeah, increasingly my audience is just, people who want to learn about the world in a different kind of way, and maybe I can also kind of convince them that anthropology is important, or even not more, ideally, maybe convert some of them into anthropologists at the end of the day.
Hmm. Amazing. Well, I hope you're proud of what you've created with this book, because it feels like it's been such a tremendous amount of work, and you've put such a big portion of yourself into it. And I got a lot out of reading the book, and I'm really happy to keep pressing it into the hands of customers here, and hope we can get more people to read it.
Thank you so much. I mean, I really appreciate all the support that you all have given me. I'm excited for the
Yeah.
the Culver City Book Fair. I mean, there's lots,
Oh
like,
yeah. We're going to
Yeah.
have
So
you at the Culver City Book Festival on February 22nd at the Venda Museum here. So we're putting together a panel of on immigration, and we're using your agreement to come as a hook to hopefully get some other
cool.
big authors to come.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Okay, so we usually close out the podcast by asking for our guests to recommend 3 books that they would have people read. What are 3 books that you like to recommend, inspired by your work and what we've talked about?
Let's see, books that I would recommend. Men We Reap by Jesmyn Ward, I think is, I love her fiction. Like Sing Unburied Sing is a really great fiction book, but I think her memoir for me was really super important. I mean, that's why there's a person in the book that's named after her,
Oh,
because I was inspired by the work, and the memoir, it's of her, the story of her deceased brother and other male relatives who kind of meet an early demise. Found it to be very moving, and one that I go back to a lot. Let's see what else. Cities of the Plain by Cormac McCarthy. Although it's probably, I mean, the things that are coming out right now about Cormac McCarthy, we probably already knew. But I'm, I still find, his work to be helpful for thinking about narrative. I love the way that almost every book is written quite. It feels to me differently. Like it's almost like different authors each time, but it feels like it's him trying to reinvent himself in different ways. And I think out of the Border trilogy, that's the one that moves me the most, kind of emotionally. And then Blood Meridian as this other piece of that story, which is other end of it. Was also that was an important book for me in working on my first project. And if I had to plug one more book, so Willy Vlautin is probably my favorite living fiction writer right now, and he has a new book out called The Horse. Willy's books typically, I like them for a lot of reasons. One of them, and I think maybe this is not so obvious, is that his books are always about kind of the downtrodden people who are hard luck, who go through these difficult stories, but are often kind of everyday working class stories. And I've always appreciated the endings because they just sort of end, and they don't end like in a super he doesn't know the protagonist, he or she doesn't always get the boy or the girl. It's not always like this amazing ending. It's like it's kind of a reasonable ending, like one that like you're like, oh yeah, that kind of tracks. Like I can see that, and you're a little disappointed. You're like, but it doesn't feel kind of fantastical. I think with the new book, The Horse, there's a hopeful ending at it, and I think that it's more hope that I've seen in any of his other books. And I don't know if that's because Willy's getting older and he's getting more optimistic in his old age. Maybe that's what it is. But but that's a book that I read pretty recently that I really got a lot from.
fantastic. Well, thanks again for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you in February, and keep enjoying all the fruits of your success. And happy holidays.
Thank you so much. Likewise, looking forward to seeing you all soon.
Okay, thanks. If you'd like more information from us, check out the show notes or send us an email at podcast@villagewell.com. You can always order the books mentioned in each episode through villagewell.com. This episode of Shelf Talkers is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you in 2 weeks, and keep reading.